Welcome once again to Pale Blends and Beyond video interview channel. Thank you for joining us today. Songwriter bassist Tim Vass and singer guitarist Gregory Webster began as the Cinematics in 1982 and morphed into Razorcuts. The band recorded several singles and a couple albums between 1984 and 1990. After this period of time, Tim switched gears and genres as part of psych folk bands Red Chair Fadeaway and Dandelion Wine. Gregory formed the Carousel, Saturn V and Sportique. The duo reformed in '92 for a one-off single as Forever People. Currently, Tim Vass has a new band, Silver Biplanes, and a new album coming out. We'll do some recollection and catching up with both Tim and Gregory in today's interview. Welcome, guys.
Hi.
Hi, Greg.
Let's go back a ways and talk about your upbringing, your early lives, where you both were born. Just take turns, and recollections of childhood.
Tim's the oldest, so he can go first.
I was born many years before Greg, but in the same town. We're both from Luton, which is an industrial town about 35 miles from London in the UK. Both grew up in sort of working class households, really, went to working class schools, hung out with working class kids. And we met when we were teenagers in the pub in Luton. I think it's probably fair to say that we both had been really interested in music throughout our lives. And you know, I'd been collecting records for many years since I was about 11 years old. So I already had quite a big record collection. But the thing that probably inspired both of us to actually go on a kind of musical journey of our own was punk, because when we met, it was punk rock was its kind of peak in the UK, and we met at the pub that was a centre of the punk community in Luton. Lots of people we knew were forming bands, and it seemed the natural thing to do. I think before that, although I'd always loved music, the idea of being in a band just would have seemed ridiculous. I had no musical training. In the sort of early to mid 70s, there was this idea that people in bands were musicians, and you know, that wasn't really for me. But when punk came along, it allowed us to do something of our own. And I think I'm right in saying that we formed our first band together pretty much straight away when we had a proper conversation in the pub over a beer. And I'd never picked up an instrument at that point in time, but 3 or 4 weeks later, I was playing bass on stage with Gregory in our first band together. So yeah, amazing times, really.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that before too. That the onset of punk really inspired a lot of people pick up their instruments and be self-taught. And like you said, it wasn't such a musician's thing anymore. Be classically trained and all that kind of stuff. Well, switch over to Greg. We decided we'll go with Greg, and I'm not talking to myself. So talk about your upbringing, your childhood, and up to where you guys met.
Yeah, well, I mean, Tim did a great way of summarising, where we started in Luton, and I lived on the edge of town, but I went to a different comprehensive that's a school, should I say? That's the lower tier of our education system. I'll probably put it that way. And Tim went to a similar comprehensive school across town, a rival school, in fact. So kind of interesting that we ended up hooking up when we met down the pub. I probably picked up a guitar a couple of months before Tim, but not much more before that he did. And we wouldn't be talking to you now if not for punk. I mean, that's absolutely for certain. You know, it completely changed the direction of travel of our thought processes and our musical interests, and you know, it really had a huge impact. And yeah, so we, you know, you could literally just jump on stage without being able to play. I did that in my first band just before I hooked up with Tim. I'd done that, and yeah, you know, hammered out a few bar chords and played a Sex Pistols song on stage, and you know, about 5 times because I didn't know any other songs. And yeah, that's how we kind of got started.
Well, Tim, you mentioned
Actually,
your...
can you just hold tight there, because I can illustrate this with
Sure. Yeah.
with an artifact.
Okay, great. I love visuals. I love visuals.
Tim's always better prepared than I am.
Well, Greg, real quick, do you remember your first 45 or album that you ever got?
Well, that's always a difficult one to remember for sure. I know that the one that I coalesced around when I was being interviewed a lot with Razorcuts, and then after that was my first single was Solid Gold Easy Action by T-Rex. But equally at the time, it could have been Goodbye to Jane by Slade, or, you know, any of those. It could have been My Cuckoo by Alvin Stardust. So it was, you know, you can tell the period we're talking about here. Yeah. First album, I'm not actually sure about first album, I have to say. So yeah, well, let's go and see what interesting artifact Tim has just discovered.
Okay, so we're rewinding now a few bars to when to Greg's band that he was in. Actually, when I first met Greg, he was in a band called the Rebel Style. Now, they didn't have many songs. I'm not sure if they even had any songs, but what they did have was badges.
We did, yes, we did indeed.
There's a Rebel Style badge, which I still got.
And you can tell the scope of our ambition is that it says the sound of the new town, and the new town is a very small district in our hometown. So I didn't really have, my vista wasn't very big at the time.
Well, that's truly an artifact there.
Yeah, I do treasure that, actually.
Have you tried to put that up on eBay?
I don't think it's worth doing, Tim. It'll cost you more than you get for it.
Well,
it means a lot to us, but I'm not sure it would be much.
Well, that's what matters. Tim, can you recall one of your first 45s or albums that you ever got?
The first 45 I ever bought was Telstar by the Tornadoes, which I believe was #1 in America.
Yeah.
It came out in 1962. I didn't buy it in 1962. But a few years later, so I'm talking probably mid-ish 60s, maybe a bit after that, my next door neighbour had a pile of 7-inch 45s and a dance set record player, and I used to go around and listen to their records. And although they had things like the Beatles and the Kinks and all that kind of stuff, which was great, the record that really intrigued me was Telstar, because it just had this unearthly sound. And in those days, there used to be a small record shop next to the football ground in Luton. And after one of our football games, one of the first football games I went to, in fact, I was just looking through the box on the pavement outside this, outside the football ground, outside this record shop, and there was Telstar by the Tornadoes. So I got my dad to give me the money to buy it, and it was the first record I ever bought. I still love it to this day. Still got that copy. Yeah, and the thing is, I think it tells you a little bit about the way my mind works, because the thing that I liked about it was it had this mad sound. Later on, I found out all about Joe Meek, the producer, and about the way he used the studio, and the fact that, you know, he would get the drummers to throw their drums away and just play the boxes, and he had a spring reverb which he made himself out of a spring from somewhere or other, car, I think. So, you know, all of that is very much the way that I like to use the studio. It's a big influence on the way that I record music to this day. So it's interesting, I think, that the first record I bought is so illustrative. You know, it could easily have been, I don't know, a Kinks record, a Herman's Hermits record, or I don't know, but it wasn't. It was Telstar by the Tornadoes.
Well, yeah, it was the original DIY attitude, I think, with Joe Meek. You know, do it yourself. Okay, well, let's move along, since we're, you know, a short timer with Greg. Talk about the cinematics. And you released, what, the one single, right?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, I mean, the cinematics started off as we talked about that we emerged, got together in the local punk community in Luton, and we started playing gigs. And after a number of, I think, name changes, perhaps we coalesced around. I think the cosmetics initially, but then we changed it to the cinematics. So we have no idea why we were coming up with these names now, but Tim might be able to shed light. But anyway. We started off as a punk band, a very, very rudimentary punk band. We both loved bands like Chelsea and Generation X, and we had at the time, it's really, I mean, retrospectively we look back and how did we morph from that into the band that actually recorded the single. It was effectively, we were at the time when kind of punk was kind of becoming a diaspora of kind of different people doing different things. The original kind of intention of doing your own thing was actually happening. And so people weren't constrained by the original stylistic constraints of punk anymore. And there was people doing, there was the postcards record scene happening in Scotland, and both Tim and I absolutely loved that. Tim was really, he went to see Joy Division probably more times than anyone else alive, I think. And that contributed to what we ended up doing. And we ended up kind of moving, and also, I'll also mention the Pastorals as well. We're putting out cassettes. There was lots of, and people were writing to each other. It was always a very grassroots level. All this was happening. It just meant that we kind of changed direction quite dramatically. We kind of developed into a completely different sound. And as it turned out, the cinematics was just a kind of stepping stone, but so that's how we got from a very, as I say, very rudimentary punk band to the band that put out the single.
Right. Well, you mentioned Postcard. There are a lot of Scottish bands coming out at that time. So very, 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 I'm sure influential at that time. So then you became the Razorcuts, and talk about what the other members, their influences that they brought to the table.
So I pick this one up, Greg.
Yeah, go on.
So after we'd done the cinematic single, we carried on doing other stuff locally, but I think we kind of lost direction a little bit, and we one of the problems was we struggled to find other people in our hometown that had similar taste in music, similar interest in what we were doing, but luckily around that time we also got into the living room early creation scene. I was friends mainly by mail with a guy called Paul Platypus, who was in a band called 12 Cubic Feet. Before that, he was in a band called Exhibit A. So they done some really good DIY type records. In fact, the two Exhibit A singles are particularly good, like DIY records. They were probably what our record should have sounded like if we'd known what we were doing. But anyway, Paul dragged me along to various gigs in this kind of weird underground scene in London, where 12 Cubic Feet played and various other bands that were part of that scene. And through going to those gigs, I wound up at a place called the Communication Club in Camden, which was run by Alan McGee. I went to, I don't think there were more than probably half a dozen gigs there, but one of them was the Go Betweens. I think another one may have been, actually I can't remember, but anyway, it was this little club, and through that I then found out about Alan's next club, which was the Living Room, and I started going to the Living Room. Eventually I went there pretty much every night it was open, so twice a week, and through going to that club I started to meet other small bands that were sort of just starting to emerge. I dragged Gregory along. Gregory loved it as well, so he would accompany me there more often than not, and we were desperate to play at the Living Room actually, but the band that we had wasn't really quite you know, in the right place, I would say, with in terms of how well developed we were musically. So the living room crowd actually suggested that we hook up with one or two people that they knew, and David Swift, our original drummer in Razorcuts, we were actually introduced to him through Alan McGee. He was David was not the main drummer in Biff Bang Pow, but he was kind of the substitute drummer for when their main drummer wasn't available. And he'd played a number of gigs with Biff Bang Pow, and Alan suggested he would be a good fit for us. And I think when David Swift joined the band, that was when we kind of became Razorcuts. We weren't actually called Razorcuts at that point in time, but he was a great kind of explosive Keith Moon type drummer, but also, you know, with his own kind of idiosyncratic style, and he really he kind of melded it together really. So I think at that point in time it was just the three of us, but yeah, I mean it turned us into something a little bit more, you know, closer to what we wanted to be. We were still pretty much a kind of punk influenced band with other influences at that time, so we were influenced by things like the Pastels and TV Personalities and early Primal Scream and these kind of things, and the other bands that we saw at the living room. But we were still basically a pretty punky sort of band at the time. But we very quickly started to develop away from that after David joined the group, and we started to take our songwriting more seriously. So I don't know if you want to pick up the story from there, Gregory. And I suppose Joe arriving was probably the next thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I was gonna just mention that even before David joined us, we did do some recording because we were hanging around with the creation crowd with Alan and Joe, etc. And we went in the studio and did a couple of tracks with Joe Foster producing, and it was with our previous drummer, so that was the first time that we actually started realizing something that certainly at the time I didn't have the technical capability to do, was to actually start getting some of that 12-string sound. So it was Joe that was able to bring that along. I remember he borrowed a 12-string box from his friend in the Stingrays, a band in London at the time, and you know, and we haven't kind of, this is another tangent to the influences that came together with the Razorcuts, is that Tim and I mean, I think Tim had, you know, been into a lot of this stuff for a lot longer than I had. But in the early 80s, we certainly kind of, as, you know, punk had kind of become a diaspora, and then, you know, we started looking back and, you know, I started looking back for sure, and back at the 60s and the kind of whole countercultural thing that was happening in the 60s, and the folk rock explosion, and the Byrds and the Buffalo Springfield and Beau Brummels, and Tim was into all this stuff, you know, probably before me. And we wanted to kind of bring that in somehow. We didn't really know how that would all fit together, but we wanted to bring it in. And Joe had already obviously been playing about with that kind of stuff, and he thought he was Joe Meek, and so, you know, it kind of all fit together quite well. So
yeah, I hear that quite a bit too. Like the grass is always greener on the other side of the pond, kind of, you know. A lot of the you guys, you know, were influenced by a lot of American bands, you know. And I know a lot of Americans likewise are influenced by British bands. So, you know, it's kind of like, you know, take your pick, you know. But you are, I'm sure, talk about influences, Greg. You're the big Buzzcocks fan, right?
I was and am a huge fan of the Buzzcocks. Tim saw them much more than I ever did, I have to say. So, you know, Tim is probably equally, if not more, of a Buzzcocks fan than I was. But yeah, I loved, and obviously I loved the way that Pete Shelley sang. You know, he kind of created a whole new, you know, new possibilities for how you could sing, I think. And certainly I've used that to a degree in you know, subsequent years. So yeah, I love the Buzzcocks for sure. Tim, do you want to add anything about your many times following them around the country?
I think they're probably the band that I've seen the most times, although I haven't actually seen them since they originally split up. So I saw them many times in the late 70s up until when they split up. Never actually went along to see the reformed band, funny enough. But yeah, I was a huge Buzzcocks fan, and of course we took our name from the Buzzcocks as well. So yeah, I mean they were a huge influence on us. I think this was the thing. What happened was that we were coming from this place in punk, and Buzzcocks in particular were a big influence on what we were doing. But at the same time, we were starting more and more to be influenced by 60s music and other things that we that we really loved, and we were trying initially I think to kind of merge all of that together. I think gradually we moved a little bit away from the punk thing, but certainly in our early period we were this weird mixture of kind of punk and American folk rock. What you're saying there about the American influence, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think musically we were very influenced by American bands of that era, but lyrically we were coming from a completely different place. We very much wanted the songs to be very English or British, and I had a kind of almost like a vernacular of words that I wanted to use in songs, and other words were kind of not acceptable in songs. I was quite Luddite about this kind of approach to what kind of lyrics was okay to use. It was almost like, anything that had been in a Kink song or an early Pooh song was okay to use, but other lyrics were not. So that was a big thing as well. And I think also the fact that the way that Greg sang, I mean, Greg's got his own, I think quite unique voice, but also he was influenced by people like Pete Shelley, especially in the early days of the band. And again, that worked well with this kind of English style of lyricism, and the fact that our music was perhaps more at that point in time based on a kind of American folk rock model.
Right. Well, the reason that I was imagining Greg was the Buzzcocks fanatic was fast forward a little bit to Sportique and the song "Anatomy of a Fool." That's pure Buzzcocks. If I didn't know any better and I just heard the song, I would say that's Pete Shelley. So you nailed it on that song. It even the instrumentation sounds dated a little bit. It just sounds like a Buzzcocks song.
Yeah, guilty, Your Honour.
Funnily enough, we in the early Razorcuts days, we had some songs that were very Buzzcocksy that we never actually recorded, didn't we, Greg?
We did indeed, yeah. We had a song called "Heart Beats Up Love Again," which was taken from the run-out groove of Spiral Scratch by the Buzzcocks. So yeah, it was clear that we probably were quite obsessed by the Buzzcocks at the time.
Okay, well, let's switch gears a little bit. Talk about the C86 scene, your part in it. How did that all come about? History and everything.
We weren't invited.
Okay.
It was funny actually, because we weren't on the original C86 album. I think we kind of felt that we perhaps should have been, but we weren't that precious about that kind of thing in those days. But there was supposed to be a series of gigs around about the time that the C86 came out that were kind of for bands that weren't actually on C86. I've got they were supposed to be at the ICA possibly, but I've got a feeling that they didn't happen. It's all a bit of a vague memory, but they might even have been called Fuck C86 or something like that. I don't know, perhaps you remember more about that than me.
No, I don't. You always remember more than me, Tim, every time. So, but it sounds plausible, definitely sounds plausible.
Okay, well, let's.
But obviously, a lot of the bands that were on the C86 were bands that we either liked or had played with or knew. So yeah, we were kind of part of that scene. I think, and obviously in later years when labels have done reissues and new versions and expanded versions of C86, we've always been on them, and I think people do associate us a little bit with the C86 scene. Yeah, I mean, I think, and you'll find this when you speak to all the other bands that are on the C86, they'll all say the same. They'll all say, well, we didn't feel part of that scene. We were part of some other scene that was over here somewhere.
Right.
So,
I recently did an interview with Phil Wilson, and they turned down what was the song and gave it to Close Lobsters. Fire Station Towers, yeah, and gave it to Close Lobsters. So yeah,
All right.
there was a lot of interesting things going on there. But like you said, it was kind of the blanket, that sound. I guess you guys, were associated or later on associated with it. Yep.
Yeah, obviously June Brides were one of a number of bands that that we'd see many times at the living room. They're really good guys, and they were probably meant to play at the ICA on the same thing as we were.
Let's go. Here we go. Here's the double album CD that I picked up without too much glare. Can you guys see it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Have to go backwards. Okay, it's a real good production. Japanese pressed. So talk about John Rivers was a producer. Had he produced anything else for you, or was this the first time?
Yeah, he started off. We first went to him to record "I Heard You the First Time" EP, which came out on Flying Nun Records, the New Zealand label. They were kind of trying to set up a bit of a UK arm at the time. So, and we had the connection to them through David Swift, who was from New Zealand originally. So, so we went there first for that record, and then we really enjoyed working with him. So that led us to go and record Storyteller there afterwards. That's when we signed for Creation after Flying Nun. And we did Storyteller with them, and then continued to do The World Keeps Turning afterwards. So the reasons why we went to John was, from my perspective, he'd done some stuff with the Pastels that I'd really liked. Although I don't think the Pastels liked it, but I really liked it. Tim had a completely different view on it because of some of the earlier stuff that he'd done. Tim, you might want to talk about that.
Yeah, John's place in Leamington Spa was kind of legendary amongst a very small select group of fans of kind of DIY indie type music, because he'd done things like the Eyeless in Gaza singles and there's a lot of stuff on Glass Records, really good kind of unusual post-punk records, really, I suppose you describe them as. And so his name was very familiar to me. So he kind of suddenly got a bit more cachet, I think, a little bit after that, around the time that we started to work with him. But his was a name that was already very familiar to me from a lot of record sleeves in my collection. But yeah, and it was a really good fit for us. He really understood what we were trying to do. He brought lots of things to the table. When we recorded the EP there, it was a real leap on from the records we'd made previously, and it was really a no-brainer that we'd do the album there if we could somehow raise the funds to do that.
Okay. Well, the Storyteller came out in '88, right? What is the castle on the cover? What castle is that?
It's a castle called Eastner Castle. It's not actually a medieval castle. It's a kind of Victorian folly, really. I came across the photo in a book of some random photos of places, and I just liked the photo, but I think almost kind of retroactively, our kind of interpretation of it was that the castle looks like something from a lot longer ago than it actually is, and that kind of was a little bit of an analogy for our music, in the sense that we weren't a 60s band, but there were big elements of what we did that were sort of influenced by the 60s, and that was how I kind of rationalized it later. But I think that initially I just liked the picture, and I showed it to Gregory, and we decided that I think we discussed together how we'd bleach it out and put a sort of particular color behind it and stuff. But I think it's a really nice cover. I think it's a little bit of a shame it's not one of the many amazing medieval and Norman castles that exist in Britain. It's not one of those, sadly, but it's a nice image.
Yeah, and I like the angle too with the tall grass.
Yeah,
too. That really adds to the effect, I think. also on that. Well, let's talk about a few of the tracks on there. I've always liked the title track, especially the chorus. So I think Greg, you did a real good job on that. How did you feel about that song?
I thought it was a great song. If we were going to talk lyrics, Tim should be the one doing the talking because he wrote them all. That was a clear differentiation that we haven't perhaps spelt out for our younger listeners. Is that I used to write all the music and Tim used to write all the lyrics. So that was we had our jobs to do in the band, and Tim wrote the lyrics to Storyteller. So Tim, would you like to tell us about the lyrics to Storyteller?
Yeah, like a lot of the songs on that album, it's kind of about the idea of escape, and it's kind of about the idea of things being a bit screwed up, and what you can do to either make things better or kind of get away from things. And that's kind of what it's about. It's about this idea that there's this hustle and bustle of life going on, and sometimes you just want to spend time reading a book, watching a film, spending time with those storytellers that mean a lot to us. So that's kind of what it's about. There's a lot of other things buried in there. I don't like to be too explicit about what the lyrics mean, partly because some of them are really, really personal, so it would just be really boring for anyone else to know what particular lines mean. But also, it is nice for people to have their own, when people listen to a song, whether it's our song or anybody's song, people to have their own take on what it is and their own personal feeling. And I think that's good. And anybody who thinks one of our songs is about something in particular, then yeah, that's what it's about for you. If that works for you, right, and it makes it magical for you, then great.
it's a personal kind of thing. I agree with that. And I have to add, with the video revolution, I think that was kind of I'm not one that's real a proponent of that. I think music should be up to the imagination, and the listener. And then once they started making videos, and it kind of defined, what it's supposed to be. And a lot of people, you became lazy and like, okay, well, I don't have to really think about this. The video is going to tell me what the song is.
You'll know that you can't find any Razorcuts videos because we didn't make
right.
I completely agree. And funnily enough, just recently, in connection with my new band, we were doing a mixtape, and I came across this. They weren't even called videos in those days, but it was a promo film of the Yardbirds singing "For Your Love," and it's a song that I've always really loved. In the promo film, they are completely inexplicably standing in a field wearing suits of armor, and it's brilliant. It has absolutely nothing to do with the song whatsoever. And that was kind of a bit of a thing with promo films in the 60s. They just did some mad thing. And actually, I'm all for it, because that isn't telling you anything at all about the lyrics of that song. Right. It's just a great thing to see just to see Eric Clapton dressed in a suit of armor and looking suitably embarrassed by it all. It's brilliant.
I'll have to. Is that available? I mean, is it on YouTube?
It's on YouTube. Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's brilliant.
I'll have to check that out. Well, let's switch to another song. My favorite, I think it's my all-time favorite Razorcuts track, is Sky High. Nice guitar on that one, and of course the ending with "The world is very beautiful." What sentiment there, and then "Spin Me Round." That one is just, that stays in your head a long time, and I think that's my favorite track.
I've got a feeling that the "Spin Me Round" thing was Greg's original kind of guide vocal thing for that, because what we used to do was Greg would sometimes record just tape cassettes of him singing songs to just playing guitar and singing some kind of nonsense melody over the top, which I would then turn to the lyrics. And I've got a feeling the "Spin Me Round" may have been on the original cassette, and I just thought, yeah, it's great. I just left that in place, and it was out of that it came the idea of it being the Earth spinning around.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, it's very, very effective in that song. So anyway,
I didn't get credit for it.
But to balance that out, I think I played 3 notes of lead guitar on that, which I never got credit
right,
for.
okay.
So.
on
The quits, the quits.
on Brighter Now, did you guys use an orchestra, or is that like tapes on Brighter Now?
It's how did he do it? It's John Rivers who put the orchestration together. He wrote all the individual parts and then played it on keyboard.
Yeah, it's a proper 4-part string arrangement, almost like a string quartet arrangement, but it's not real instruments.
Okay.
I think we can reveal that now after. It does sound very authentic. I mean, at that time, it was very hard to get those kind of effects, using the technology that was available at the time. But Rivers did an amazing job on it. And what he did was he coupled it with like a little piano part, which doubles the thing that the strings are doing, and it just makes it sound that much more realistic.
Yeah, it does.
Tim, can I double back onto Sky High for a moment? Am I allowed to say what it's about?
Yeah,
of course.
Please do.
Yeah. Because I just think it's worth pointing out what it's about, because we always got accused of writing lots of boy meets girl type songs, which is kind of not true at all. I think that's a really good example. It's actually about it's an anti-war song about Ronald Reagan's Star Wars program, which was happening at the time. So when it talks about the sword hanging over our head, that's a sword of Damocles, the potential, for a nuclear war, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an anti-war song, which we didn't really get too much press about that kind of stuff.
I think there were only 2 songs on the Storyteller LP. Actually, might be more, but I think it's 2 that are actually boy meets girl type songs. All the others are about other stuff, whatever they might appear to be about. They're not love songs at all.
Right. Well, let's go to the following year. The World Keeps Turning came out. Who did the cover artwork on that one?
It was Shirley Suter, who was my girlfriend at the time. And was subsequently the singer in Red Chair Fadeaway. Shirley did the art for that. It was I think at that time it had been building all the way through the Razorcuts era, but we were more and more becoming concerned about the environment and the ecology movement as it was at the time, and so on. And so I think we wanted a kind of cover that had a kind of naturalistic image on it, so that was why we chose that.
Okay, got it. I like the whole rhythmic feel of Mile High Towers. What are your recollections of that song?
I like it because it's got a guitar solo by me and a guitar solo by our guitar player Pete as well, which are completely different styles. I was just playing a 12-string guitar solo, which is something I did on a number of songs, but then Pete's off on his crazy kind of riffs all over the place. And I particularly like that. And I really like the lyrics actually on that song. It's very evocative of Tim's life in London, I think, at the time.
Yeah.
Is that right? Is that right, Tim?
Oh, very much so. Yeah. I was working in an office at the time, and it's partly about that. And it's about other things as well. It's partly about moving on from our hometown as well, because by that time we'd socially kind of moved away from Luton and some of the people that we'd been in bands with and stuff. So we'd kind of our lives had taken us elsewhere, and it was partly about that, but it was also about the good and bad things about working in an office.
Yeah. Well, another song, I Won't Let You Down. It's nice how it starts out more acoustic with a slower cadence, and then I Won't Let You Down, the lyrics, and then the horns are a nice touch on that one.
Yeah, I really like that particular song actually. Yeah, I think I can't really remember, but I suspect the arrangement was about 50% us and 50% John Rivers. It was certainly him that brought the trumpet player in, and it does work really, really well. And it is a real trumpet.
Yeah.
I think it was actually Pete's friend who played the trumpet, wasn't it?
I think it might have been actually. Yeah. Oh yeah, actually, I think it was.
Yeah, it was. So I think we might have had visions of kind of emulating the wonders of love at the time.
Yeah.
And that's probably where we were coming from with that kind of arrangement.
Okay. And then my favorite on this particular album is Snowbound. You can feel the cold in the air listening to this. I mean, it really comes across. And I like the guitar towards the end, one speaker back to the other speaker, and how I wish we were snowbound. You know.
When I listen to that song, I love the song too. But when I listen to it, I always think that when we rehearsed it, it's got that middle section where I'm singing, "Oh, how I wish we were snowbound."
Mm-hmm.
We had the last one went up really high, and the rest of the band always got quite nervous when I wanted to sing really high because I couldn't hit the notes. So I don't know whether it was them who stopped me or Rivers stopped me, but I always kind of think it would have been great if we'd have got that high harmony in there as well. But there you go.
It's a sick song, and it's very effective. Another one. So it pulls the listener in, and like I said, it's I love to listen to it during the winter time. It's great anytime, but especially during the winter. Okay, well, now Greg, were you working with Elizabeth Price, the Carousel, while you were still with the with Razorcuts?
Oh yeah,
like a side project kind of.
Yeah, Elizabeth was my girlfriend at the time, and so she was in Tulagosh, which was kind of in some ways our sister band because the way that Tulagosh formed was me and Liz went along to a gig in her in the bar in her college, which was had Pete Monchaloff, who later joined Razorcuts, playing in the band, and his girlfriend at the time was Amelia Fletcher from Tulagosh. So we kind of had loads of connections. So when Liz decided that she didn't want to continue in Tulagosh, she wanted to investigate something quite different. And we decided, when the way that I was playing guitar by that point was, I was playing a lot of I could sometimes play some acoustic 12-string, which kind of chimed quite well with the way that she was putting songs together. Lots of kind of rounds of melody. So we actually formed that, and we put out I think, I'm not sure whether it was all the records that Liz and I had a record label called Cosmic English Music, and we put out 2 12-inch singles by the Carousel and 2 12-inch singles by Tim's band Red Chair Fadeaway, and the next planned releases was going to be the Razorcuts, and I think the Springfields were penciled in as well, but we never quite got to that point because the Razorcuts split up at that point. So
okay, well, I had heard My Boy and His Motorbike on a Various Artists compilation. That's how I was turned on to the Carousel, and I still like that song. You know what it reminds me of? Do you guys remember the Caravels? You Don't Have to Be a Baby to Cry. That early 60s song.
I think I know the genre you're talking about, if not the particular song.
The duo. It was a cover track itself, but you don't have to be a baby to cry. I can't sing, but
yeah.
It reminded me a lot of that. And were her vocals double tracked, or is that just?
Possibly. I mean, she was putting lots of vocal tracks down. I don't know whether they were double tracked, but there was lots of different harmonies and things going on a lot of the Carousel tracks, and it was that strange combination of a lot. She really loved a lot of the girl groups, the Shangri-Las, etc. the Ronettes, and so there's that aspect to it, but also she was going back and kind of mining kind of medieval imagery, and and so to the predominant imagery from the Carousel was kind of this kind of weird medieval folk band, which you know, cosmic English music. That's what we were trying to do. We obviously nicked that from Graham Parsons, but anyway.
Well, looking at the time, let's speed up a little bit. I want to get my questions into you, Greg, before you have to go.
Sure,
Saturn V was your next incarnation. What was the sound that you were going for on Sky Cycle?
Yeah, we wanted to. I mean, I was listening to people like Superchunk and Galaxy 500, so you can hear aspects of I think both of those bands, you know. So the scene had moved on, I think, and yeah, I was quite interested in a lot of that stuff. So we tried to do something like that. Yeah, that kind of, I think that covers it. Somewhere in between those two. And we played with Superchunk when they were touring in the UK as well. So yeah, and I used to love Galaxy 500. Used to go and see them a lot when they were over in the UK. So it's kind of melding those two influences. And Teenage Fan Club were doing a lot of stuff as well that I really liked. So, and they'd come out of this, you know, we'd kind of seen them come through the same scene that we'd been involved in. So yeah, all of those things.
Okay. What was the reaction to your one album that you put out? Was there
non-existent, probably the best way to. We're big in Japan. We toured Japan and almost toured the east coast of America, but we split up on attempting to do that. So we didn't quite make it.
I liked it,
Okay.
but then it was for my mates. So
Right. Well, you're a little partial, I guess. Yeah.
yeah.
But real quick, then, Greg, talk about Sportique. You mentioned earlier the connection with Tallulah Gosh, Rob Percy, and then you also mentioned television personalities, Mark Flunder. Why was he credited as Sir? Was he knighted as Sir Mark Flunder, or is that a joke?
Yeah, I don't think the Queen has quite got around yet to recognising the honour. She's been a bit slow on the uptake, I'm afraid. So no, that is. We just think it would be appropriate for him to have that honour, but he didn't quite ever get it officially. So yeah, you can see we were all the way through. We were playing when the Razorcuts were playing. We played a lot of gigs with Tallulah Gosh, and then with Heavenly and on to all the other stuff, all the other bands. You know, we've always had that connection with those people. Amy and Rob have always been very good friends. Amy was in Sportique for not the first album, but from there on keyboards. So yeah, and it was a very different band from Razorcuts in many ways, because when Razorcuts came together, I think it was kind of a happy accident that everything kind of worked with our influence of the Buzzcocks and, you know, the 12-string, you know, kind of folk rock thing, and it came together and it just worked. And it was, you know, I don't think it was as planned, you know, as perhaps that's when real good music happens. Is you don't plan it, it just kind of happens. You go in and it happens. You think, wow, isn't that wonderful? And that's what happened with Razorcuts. Whereas we were much older when we put Sportique together. And so a lot of the Sportique stuff is very knowing, like you mentioned, Anatomy of a Fall, clearly, you know, derived, heavily influenced by the Buzzcocks. And we kind of did that. You know, I was doing that deliberately, writing songs. I think, okay, this is going to be in the style of the Buzzcocks, or, you know, this one's going to be like Wire, this one's going to be like Magazine, you know, whoever it might be. So it was a very different thing. And yeah, and we kind of went on a journey. We started off, you know, very much, I think, in the same, you know, kind of indie pop area that, you know, a lot of our contemporaries, but we kind of almost like went backwards to year zero towards being a punk band again. So it was kind of a nice circle in the end, actually, that I ended up where I'd started.
Right. Well, here's the CD I have. This one, see,
Yeah.
gotta go backwards.
First
Okay.
album, yeah.
Yep, the first album. And the song that harkens back to Razorcuts for me is Northern Sky. That sounds very much Razorcutsy.
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember how the hell that song goes. But yeah, it absolutely, yeah. It's like it's like, you know, it's like a third division Razorcuts. It's not as good as Razorcuts.
Well, there were a number of references. I want to bring this up too about sky high, mile high towers in the Razorcuts. Was that something like you know, that was going on, you know, as far as like some kind of theme or subconscious or
Are you trying to allude? It's an 8 miles high question, is it?
You're right. Right. The birds reference birds.
I do quite like the word high. No, we were at no time drug addled in Razorcuts.
Okay.
We were drunk a lot of the time, but we weren't drug addled.
Okay. Sorry, had to ask about that.
But I mean, there is a point here, which is that, you know, like my big obsession, especially in those days, was psychedelic music. And, you know, I was talking earlier about that sort of lexicon of words. You know, there are some words that just they kind of suggest, I don't know, mind altered states or whatever. I didn't write psychedelic lyrics, but I think some of the actual words that crop up in songs, you know, I like the sound of them because they reminded me of maybe psychedelic records that I liked.
Right. Talk about some of the gigs that you had with Razorcuts, some of the ones that are most memorable or that you enjoyed.
We were incredibly fortunate, actually. I was thinking about this recently. Weirdly, I don't know why, but this came into my head recently. You know, the bands that we didn't do a huge number of gigs in Razorcuts. I think we did probably 60 or 70 gigs over the 5 years or whatever that we existed. But we played with so many great bands of that time. You know, not necessarily big bands, but bands that we really admired. You know, we played with Hurrah, we played with Primal Scream, we played with the Go-Betweens, Jasmine Minks. There's, you know, obviously Tallulah Gosh and Heavenly, who were, you know, friends of ours. We played with them lots as well, and lots of others. You know, we played with loads of really good bands. We were very lucky, and for the most part, you know, we got on really well with those people and had a good time.
Great.
Oh, the Chills we played with as well. They were great.
House of Love, I think, as well. And,
House of Love, yeah.
Was it Weather Prophets? Did we play with the Weather Prophets?
Oh, Weather Prophets.
Well, we played with Pete, didn't we? I can't remember whether we played. I think we probably did at like a creation event. But yeah,
I think so.
What about Brilliant Corners?
No,
I don't think we played with the Brilliant Corners. No.
I just
no, that was.
It's just one that just popped into my head. Sorry. All right. All right. Well, what would you like to add, Greg, before you depart?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the gigs, and I think Tim's got everything covered. I mean, it wasn't always so much when we were playing as well, though. It was just a really great scene to be involved in at the time.
Yeah.
So going along and seeing, you know, we saw the early performances of Primal Scream and Jesus and Mary Chain, and, you know, and obviously the Loft and the June Brides, etc., etc. All those brilliant bands. Jasmine Minks, we really loved the Jasmine Minks as well. It was just a great time to be involved, and, you know, we were up in London a lot. We didn't live in London, but we spent an awful lot of time going up to London to see all this wonderful music. And you know, we were based initially. We rehearsed in London as well. You know, so, you know, that worked with David when David came into the band, but other people could then join us, and, you know, Joe played with us a bit, Joe Foster, and then we kind of decamped to Oxford, where I was by that time living, and you know, and put a slightly different band together around that. So that's worth knowing. You know, we kind of, you know, we were never really a London band, but we were never really an Oxford band either. So it's kind of a strange. We're kind of the travelling Wilburys of the indie pop world.
we'll talk real quickly. It's coming down to the wire about what else is going on today with you, family life, and interest outside of music.
Well, Tim kind of mentioned when he was talking about the evolution of the Razorcuts and into other stuff that he subsequently did about the environmental interest that was developing with us at the time, you know, and that was reflected in the Forever People single, which was a benefit for Friends of the Earth. And nowadays I'm a trustee of my local wildlife trust. I'm also the chair of an ecological consultancy. So I kind of put a lot of my energy and effort into that sphere nowadays, rather than the music. I get a little frustrated. If Tim comes up with a brilliant lyric to do a second Forever People single, that would be fantastic, because I'd like to revisit it, but it's a very difficult area to write about. And I think Tim absolutely nailed it when we did the Forever People single, and I guess it's difficult to follow up, isn't it? So yeah. So I'll leave it there.
I was fine with that area, because and this was one of the things that was happening towards the end of Razorcuts. It became such a thing in my mind that it almost kind of started to dominate every sort of waking hour almost, that it was really hard to write lyrics about it, because it was too hard on my sleeve. And you know, we'll come back to this in a minute, perhaps, when we talk about the stuff that I've done since. But yeah, I mean, I agree with Gregory. I think that's, you know, if we were to do another thing together, that would be the natural thing to do. But it's finding a way of doing it in a sort of classy way, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you haven't closed all doors to that possibility. Yeah.
No, I pester Tim occasionally, but he's a bit, you know, he's not sure.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Well,
I'll leave you to persuade him.
All right. Well, thank you, Greg, for taking part in this.
I'm sorry I can't stay on the line. Unfortunately, I've got to go. But it's great to meet you, Greg, and I hope the rest of it goes well.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you, Greg.
See you later, Greg.
See ya.
All right. Now we get to the nitty gritty. Here we go. Now we get to the the hard question. No, I took it easy on you guys. Now I'm going to really come down.
You're going to talk about the split now that Gregory's gone.
Right. No, it's all laid back. It's all laid back. It's all good. Okay, well, let's go back up a little bit to the after Razorcuts for you. What was your focus then? Was that Red Chair Fadeaway?
Yeah, a bit like what Gregory was saying about the Carousel. Red Chair Fadeaway already existed before Razorcuts split up. We did a couple of singles on Gregory and Lizzie's label as Red Chair Fadeaway, and in fact, the original first Red Chair Fadeaway record is, I think it features all of the then Razorcuts apart from Gregory. So it was very, you know, we actually used to support Razorcuts occasionally because it was essentially the same people but with a different singer. But Red Chair Fadeaway is a very different kettle of fish to Razorcuts. I've got very, very broad taste in music, but my first love and main love really is psychedelic music. And I think by the end of the 80s, I was really keen to be in a psychedelic band, really. And Razorcuts were not that. You know, we had elements of that, and we were very much a 60s influence band, but we were not a psychedelic band. And I think that was kind of what I wanted to do. But also at that time, Shirley, who was my girlfriend at the time, was writing songs, and you know, also shared my love of various psychedelic and acid folk type records, and it just seemed the natural fit really to go over to doing that kind of music. And as Razorcuts kind of wound down and eventually split up, and that became the focus. And the other thing for me was that in Razorcuts I'd always been the bass player, whereas in Red Chair Fadeaway I was able to do lots of other stuff. I played lead guitar in Red Chair Fadeaway and loads of other mad instruments as well. And so it became an outlet for some other things that I wanted to do. So yeah, so that then became, you know, my musical focus for the next few years.
Right, right. So have to mention Red Chair Fadeaway. That's from that Bee Gees song, right?
It is.
Okay, okay. For people that are not aware of that, okay.
Yeah,
Three
it's a track on the first Bee Gees album, which is essentially a Beatles-esque psychedelic pop album and a complete masterpiece. It contains lots of songs that people will know because they've been covered by various artists, but it also includes a handful of out-and-out kind of psychedelic, whimsical songs, one of which is Red Chair Fadeaway.
Right. I love their early stuff.
Yep.
They, the brothers Gibb, were great composers, singers. Even their disco days. I mean, I like that music too. So I like everything they've done.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I mean, I love the first 4 albums especially, but I do like all their stuff really.
Right. Okay. Who's that going back and forth?
That's my son.
Okay. It's a cameo appearance, huh? Okay. Well, so that was always like bubbling underneath that psych folk kind of influence. What you liked was it was always there.
Yeah. And then as we, after we'd done the first couple of Red Chair Fadeaway singles, we wanted to do an album. And the album, yeah, I mean, we just went right out there really, and used all sorts of mad instruments, and tried to. We were heavily influenced by all sorts of things, but especially English psychedelia, but also sort of acid folk type stuff. So it was all of that really, and obviously that was a completely different direction to where Gregory was going at the time with Sportique. So it was natural really for us to go off and do different things. We were still mates, we still are mates, but musically we just wanted to go and explore other things really.
Other things. We'll talk about your hardcore Razorcuts fans. Did you lose some of them when you went in that direction? Did some of them feel like what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, it was a changing time anyway for music, because that sort of mid-80s scene had started to morph into various other things. The early 90s in particular, it was a time when like the whole American grunge type thing was happening. You had the acid house explosion happened in the UK. So there were a lot of other different things going on, and what happened was some of our contemporaries kind of embraced aspects of those genres, but that wasn't for me really. I had no real interest in what was going on in the early 90s musically. My head was very much in 1967 and 1971. I didn't really care about what was going on. So yeah, so yeah, it was. I had no interest in doing stuff that fitted in with what was going on at the time.
Right.
But your question was about Razorcuts fans. Sorry. So yeah. The point. So yeah, I mean, Greg mentioned that the Sportique record. I think he had a little bit of trouble finding an audience, and we did as well to some extent. And I think similarly to some of the things that Gregory has done, a lot of the people who've been interested in the things that I've done since Razorcuts have been abroad, elsewhere, other countries. Red Chair Fadeaway did pretty well in Italy, and a few other European countries, probably better than we did in the UK. So yeah, I mean, we had support from a whole other area really. I think the infrastructure that had supported Razorcuts, kind of the fanzine network that had grown up in the 80s, had started to disappear. And anyway, weren't really that into Red Chair Fadeaway. But as we advanced and did the albums, we started to get support from psychedelic magazines. We got reviewed in Ptolemaic Terrascope, and Sound Effects from Sweden was a really great magazine at the time, and a magazine called Rockarilla in Italy, which really gave us a lot of support. So we did get quite a lot of support, but not from the same places that Razorcuts drew their support from.
Right. Here's the the CD I have.
Yep, that's our second album, Mesmerized, which incidentally has just gone up on the download platforms yesterday, I think, via the good people at Shambolic. Michael at Shambolic has helped us to put all of the old Red Chair Fadeaway stuff up, so you can now download that album on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever, if the desire takes you. So yeah, but that's literally within the last couple of days. Mesmerized is now up on Spotify, which I'm very excited about.
Wow. Okay. Well, what timing on that, huh?
Yeah.
On that release, I'm partial to. I hope I say it right. Cristatus. Is that right?
Oh right. Yeah.
Yeah. That was the first one that got my attention. And Under Clouds, a little more
Right.
poppy sounding on that one, but those are my two that I'm really partial to on that.
Yeah, Red Chair Fadeaway was essentially three people. Struan, who'd been the drummer in Razorcuts, drummed on quite a lot of the Red Chair Fadeaway stuff, but Red Chair Fadeaway was essentially three people. It was Shirley who wrote most of the songs, me and a guy called Richard Mason who wrote Cristatus. And Richard wrote a couple of songs on each album, and he also played lots of different instruments. So when we went into the studio, the three of us would kind of share mad ideas, and Richard and I would play all sorts of different things. So so it was very much the three of us bouncing ideas off of each other. And yeah, that was what we were about, really.
Yeah. Well, I have to thank you because at that point in my history of collecting music, I was not really a folk fan. I mean, yeah, some of the older stuff, yeah, I knew, but I started digging more and more into folk music and psych folk after this release, so that helped introduce me anyway.
I think the timing was a bit unfortunate for Red Chair Fadeaway, because I think had we come up with the stuff that we came up, especially on the albums, maybe 10 years later, when there was a whole kind of alternative folk scene that was very similar really to what we were doing, but we were doing it quite a long time before that, and I think we would have probably fitted into that scene that started to emerge late 90s, early 2000s. There was a whole kind of alt folk scene, which it was not at all dissimilar to what we were doing, although I think we were probably a bit more psychedelic than a lot of those bands. Well, I think we thought of ourselves as being primarily a psychedelic band, but a folky psychedelic band.
Right. Well, talk about Dandelion Wine, contrast and compare the two bands.
Yeah, so Dandelion Wine was a solo project, really. I wanted to do a record where I not only did I write all the songs, but I also sang all the songs. In Red Chair Fadeaway, Shirley wrote most of the songs, so I hadn't really written any songs for a good while. And then I wanted to do an album of my own songs. And it actually corresponded with a time when Shirley and I were in the throes of splitting up as well. So Red Chair Fadeaway had started to go onto the back burner, and Dandelion Wine became the new focus of what I was doing. So I got some friends along to help me in the studio, and various people played various things on the album, but it is pretty much a solo album, really. And I'm not the strongest singer in the world, and I think probably the thing that I maybe regret a bit with it was that I did probably too much of the singing, but I do really love the album, and it embraces a whole load of influences. Probably for the first time, everything that I liked got thrown into the mix. So there's bits of glam, there's bits of folk, there's bits of psychedelia, there's bits of indie, there's bits of post-punk. It's all in there. There's even a track that sounds like Joe Meek.
Oh wow, okay. It's got that kind of production value, huh?
Yeah, it's also up on Spotify.
Oh, okay. Plug that. Yeah.
I think maybe especially people who are kind of our generation that grew up with the indie thing in the 80s. A lot of those people have discovered other types of music as they've got older, and they've expanded their horizons and explored all the sort of different highways and byways of music. There's probably influences going on in those records that maybe our original Razorcuts fans wouldn't necessarily have recognised at the time, but now they might find that that it all makes a bit more sense to them, So yeah, I mean, I'm actually quite proud of the Dandelion Wine record, but a bit like what Greg was saying with the Sportique album, it was very hard to find an audience for it really at the time. But yeah.
Yeah. I know a lot of compilation albums and stuff, especially like Cherry Red, that will put out, a lot of these like 4 or 5 box sets, and that's how I've discovered a lot of, obscure acts. And you talk about the folk, and then they'll focus on a certain year and glam and what have you. But that's how, and maybe these albums.
Red Chair Fadeaway have been on a few of those, the Cherry Red compilations, and I think that's probably quite useful in helping people to know, even though that we existed really. So yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of these bands only had one release, maybe a single. That was it,
Yeah.
But it's good exposure. It's a good exposure. Well, let's talk about since that time. Did you do anything musically from Dandelion Wine up until the Silver Biplanes?
No.
Okay.
No, so Silver Biplanes is me returning to the fray after a long time, 20 odd years, 25 years or something.
Yeah.
Partly because the Dandelion Wine album, I put a lot into it. It took something like 3 years to record. And I got some favourable responses to it and some nice reviews and stuff, but it didn't really do as much as I hoped it would. And I kind of ran out of steam a little bit at that point, I think. Plus the fact, I was at a different time in my life, and not long after that, my son was born. I already had a stepdaughter. Vanessa and I met 25 years ago. We've been married most of that time. We've been bringing up the kids and doing other stuff, So my life kind of took me off in slightly different direction for a few years. But music, I love music so much that I think it was only a matter of time before eventually I'd get back into doing some musical stuff. And it just so happens that my wife, who's just walked in the door, is a fantastic singer. So it was there she is.
Hello.
So it was the right time to do some music stuff. And I think being in lockdown because of COVID helped as well. I'm retired from my day job. I had a bit more time on my hands, and I started writing songs, and eventually there was a whole album of songs. So the album's done. It's because of the vinyl backlog, it's not going to be out for a while yet, but the album's completely finished and will be out probably just after Christmas.
Okay, I was going to ask about that. Okay, where did you come up with the name Silver Biplanes? Where did that come from?
Okay, so it has got a meaning. So silver biplanes, it is a real thing. So in between the two wars, the British fighter aircraft were still biplanes. It was before the famous Spitfire and Hurricane and so on had been invented. So the Royal Air Force still used biplanes, and in the interwar years they were painted silver because there was no need for them to be camouflaged because we weren't at war with anyone. So anyone who's interested in the history of aviation, and particularly British aviation, will probably know what silver biplanes means. But one of the reasons we quite like it is because it kind of represents these warplanes but they were painted silver. Although they looked like they were painted silver. I won't get into the technical details of what was actually going on with them, but that was because we weren't at war with anyone. So they kind of represent a time of peace. And they are beautiful things, those aircraft. So that's where it comes from. We're named after some British aircraft that existed in between the two wars.
Oh, wow. See, I haven't heard that story, but I like watching all those documentaries. Yeah, from World War I, World War II.
It's quite good because if with band names, if you've got a name that's like, I don't know, the Books or something, and you Google it, you get 93 billion hits. Right. If you Google silver biplanes, you don't get that many. There's maybe 10 pages of hits, right, of which some are obviously us, but the others were to do with these silver biplanes from which we took our name.
Wow, I should have researched that before we chatted. Wow, then I would have learned something. Yeah, you know what it reminds me of? Do you recall the old song "Biplane Evermore"?
What's that? Biplane Evermore.
Biplane Evermore. Now I first heard it. This is going to date me quite a bit from the Royal Guardsmen.
Oh yeah, I was
Remember
going to say the Royal Guards because they did a whole aircraft themed album, didn't they?
Right, Snoopy versus
Yeah,
the Red Baron. That was my first album.
Oh really?
Yeah, I still have it. I still have it.
I own two albums by the Royal Guards. Yeah.
Snoopy for President and Snoopy versus the Red Baron. Yeah, but Biplane Evermore, great song. They were, a campy group, novelty, but they wrote some really good, love songs and that kind of stuff too. Not just
Yeah.
yeah.
The Snoopy album is kind of a novelty album, isn't it? But then they did a couple more albums. But there's one in particular. I think the tracks are different in the UK on the UK version, but there's one in particular that's contains really good self-written songs.
Right. So anyway,
we're going down a wormhole here, Greg.
Yeah, definitely dating myself there, but going back. So let's talk about, get up to date. So you said it's due out December, the album?
January probably, after Christmas. So
Okay.
we've done one single so far. Released one single, and that's got a video that accompanies it, and we did a very limited lathe cut vinyl version, but they pretty much sold out on the first day. But the tracks are there to be downloaded. Bandcamp's the best place to go to find out about Silver Biplanes. The label is Where Is That? Where Is That is where you are. I always have trouble saying the name of the label. But yeah, you probably know that it's a great label. Does lots of really interesting independent stuff. And John Jervis, who writes the label, has been really supportive of us and has really helped us. So if you go to the YIAWYA page on Bandcamp, there's lots of stuff about the band. We've got our own page on Facebook and so on as well. But yeah, so we'll be doing a couple more singles. We'll be dropping a couple more singles before the album comes out. And I should mention that Gregory actually has played guitar on 3 tracks. So
Was that right?
yeah,
Okay.
so there's a sort of mini reunion went on for the album. I asked Gregory to come along and contribute to guitar to some of the tracks. So yeah.
Okay, so twisting his arm behind his back a little bit,
Yeah. It's Gregory hasn't played for a while actually. A bit like me, he's gone on to do other stuff. He was telling you about all the environmental things that he's involved in. He's very busy with all that stuff. Obviously, he's still a great music lover, but he hasn't, like me, he hadn't played for a while. So it was great to get him back in the studio.
Right. Yeah, well, like you said earlier, it's in your blood. You've got to do it,
Yeah.
It's one of those things, well, talk about winding down here a little bit, but talk about your family life. We've seen 2 or 3 of them walk back and forth.
So I'm married to Vanessa. Vanessa was the singer in a band called the Melons back in the 90s. Did half a dozen singles on a variety of cool labels back in the 90s. We've got 2 kids. They're not kids though really anymore. So my son, who you've seen walking backwards and forwards, he's at university. He's at home at the moment. And I've also got a gorgeous stepdaughter called Georgie, who's helps us with our videos. She works in video and production. So it's all good really.
Wow, that's kind of like all in the family. You got the singer and then the video production. It's just all in house.
Yep.
You made some good connections. What other interests do you have outside of music?
So a bit like Gregory. I mean, I for a long time now, I've been really concerned about the way the world is going, and I'm very interested in sort of environmental concerns and so on. I don't spend as much time on trying to deal with that as maybe I should. I used to more when I was younger, really. But yeah, I mean, just the same stuff as most people. Really, I love reading, I love films, I love TV, and I love going out walking, that kind of thing. But really, my main interest is music, and when I'm not writing songs or playing. I like listening to music, and I collect vinyl. Yeah, I've collected vinyl since I was 10 years old, so that's not going to stop anytime soon.
Well, what do you, excuse me, what are your thoughts about the sound production of vinyl versus CD? You know, a lot of people swear by it, and they say you can't beat that vinyl.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure actually anymore whether I used to really strongly believe that vinyl sounded loads better, because especially in the early days of CDs, they tended to be mastered from vinyl records or from really knackered old tapes. They tended to be mastered in a really tinny, horrible way. The sampling rate, the early years of CDs wasn't great. I think things have moved on from then, and you know, CDs do sound pretty good, really. I mean, I would always rather listen to a CD than a download. But I just don't. They just don't have any magic for me. CDs. You know, CDs started to come about when I was probably 25, 30 years old. So, you know, I'd grown up with vinyl, really. So, you know, I almost don't care really about the nuances of which sounds best. You know, I just love the whole ritual of getting a record out of the sleeve and putting it on a turntable and all of that, and reading, you know, and I love 12-inch covers. You know,
Oh yes.
It's always been such a huge part of my life that yeah, I can't really take CDs seriously.
Right. Well,
But the CDs are archaic technology, aren't they? I mean, no young people buy CDs.
I was one of the last holdouts converting to CDs. I mean, you can see behind me, I still have all my vinyl. So I was holding out. I was like, no, I'm not going to buy a CD. I'm not going to go that way. And finally, I gave in. The ones that I could not find, you know, on vinyl, I mean on CD, you know, I've held on to those, you know. So.
Yeah, it's interesting that what's happened with indie labels over the last 10 or 15 years, because there was a time when most indie labels had moved away from doing vinyl because they just weren't able to sell enough to make it practicable, and moved over to CD. So a lot of the cool indie labels, if you go back, you know, a few years, 5-10 years, you'll see that they, you know, if you look at the discographies of most of the cool indie labels, that most stuff was coming out on CD and a lot wasn't coming out on vinyl. But that's switched around now. There's, as I understand it, there's almost no market for CDs at all amongst, you know, kind of, you know, indie bands. And so, you know, it's vinyl or nothing really. So our album, I'm not sure if it will be available on CD. It'll be, you know, it'll be available as a download, and it's obviously coming out on vinyl. But yeah, there's not really a market for CDs as I understand it anymore, which is, I think it's interesting.
Right, it really has. I think all that kind of goes in cycles too. You know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I saw a documentary not long ago about cassettes making a comeback, and I thought, well, I don't know if that's going to be a big deal, you know, because you always had that problem where they would get caught in there and the player and unravel, you know, like an 8-track. I don't see that ever really making.
Yeah, that I don't understand at all. And actually, an American label did do the 2 Razorcuts albums on cassette a few years ago. Yeah, I think Captured Tracks did the 2 Razorcuts albums on cassette. I don't even own a copy myself, but they do exist.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. All right, well, I guess we're winding down. You're probably getting hungry.
Yeah, it's well, it's what is it? It's 6:20 here in the UK. 6:30 UK time. So what time? Yeah. So what, are you 5 hours behind us in where you are?
6 hours.
6 hours.
12:30.
Half after midday.
Yeah. So we're both getting dinner time for both of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's the one thing about being 6 hours ahead. You will always experience whatever happens in life 6 hours before I do. You know?
Yeah, if the world ends, it ends right. 6 hours earlier for us.
Right, that's right. So you be sure and let me know before it happens. If you see it coming, you know, let me know. so I don't know what I would do, but anyway.
You need to have your box of your favorite vinyl ready.
Right.
Five or six, you know, absolute go-to records ready to put them on.
Right. Right. Like the desert island disc or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
That
absolutely.
kind of thing. That kind of thing. All right. Well, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I don't think so. It's been really, really interesting. You'll have realised from the last hour or two that when Greg and I get together, we can talk endlessly about the various experiences over the years. So there's loads more that we could have said probably, but I hope that's given you a little bit of a flavour of kind of where we're coming from, sort of people we are, and what the musical adventures that we've had. And yeah, maybe from what he was saying, we might do another Forever People single one day. But at the moment, obviously, my focus is on Silver Biplanes and the album. But yeah, maybe watch this space.
All right. All right. Well, thank you, Tim. And be sure and I'll send you guys an email. Thank Greg also. But thank you for your time and setting aside, this little bit of time, to share with us and hopefully some viewers, and I'll let you know as soon as it's live or once it's posted, and then you can spread the word.
Thanks, Greg. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right. I appreciate it, Tim. And you have a good evening. All right.
Yeah, you too. Have a good day. Cheers now.